My name is Clara, and I'm 34 years old. I'm a mother of two beautiful children, Emma, who's 7, and Jake, who's 5. We live in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, and for 8 years, I thought I had the perfect marriage. Until that Tuesday afternoon, when I sat frozen in my car, watching my husband Ryan walk into the Marriott downtown with 3 elegantly dressed women old enough to be my mother. I didn't scream, I didn't chase after them. I just sat there gripping my steering wheel as a truth I'd been avoiding for months finally crashed over me like a cold wave. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and hit that like button if you've ever had that gut feeling something wasn't right in your relationship. Please subscribe because this story gets much more complicated than I ever imagined, and trust me, you'll want to hear how this unfolds. To understand how I ended up in that parking garage staring at my life falling apart, I need to take you back to the beginning. Ryan and I met in college, both studying at Arizona State University. He was charming, ambitious, working toward his business degree, while I pursued graphic design. We dated for 3 years before he proposed on a sunset hike in Sedona. It felt like a fairy tale. After we married, Ryan built a successful career as a real estate developer while I worked part-time as a graphic designer. When Emma was born, I made the decision to step back from my career to focus on raising our children. Ryan supported this choice, or at least I thought he did. We had a comfortable life in our 4-bedroom house with a backyard pool, 2-car garage, and everything that looked perfect from the outside. But somewhere around Jake's 3rd birthday, things started to shift. Ryan began working later and later, claiming important client meetings that couldn't be rescheduled. These weren't occasional late nights anymore. They were becoming the norm. When I'd call his office after 7 in the evening, his secretary would tell me he'd left hours ago, yet he wouldn't come home until after 10. Then came the mysterious phone calls. Ryan would be playing with the kids in the living room when his phone would ring, and he'd immediately step outside to take it. When I asked who called, he'd give vague answers about work or potential investors. The man who used to share everything with me suddenly became secretive about the most basic parts of his day. The password changes were what really got my attention. Ryan had always been open with his devices. We knew each other's phone codes, shared a laptop, had joint access to everything. Then suddenly his phone had a new passcode. His laptop required a password I didn't know. When I asked about it, he claimed his company had implemented new security protocols that required him to change all his passwords and not share them with anyone, including family. His behavior toward me and the kids changed too. He became distant, distracted during family dinners, always checking his phone, even when we'd agreed on no devices during family time. When I tried to initiate conversations about our relationship, our future plans, or even simple daily logistics, he'd give short answers and change the subject. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. Emma had a routine checkup with her pediatrician, and Ryan had promised to pick her up from school and take her to the appointment since I had Jake's parent-teacher conference that same afternoon. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Ryan, and I could hear traffic in the background. "Clara, I'm really sorry, but something urgent came up with the Morrison project. I have to meet with some very important investors this afternoon. Can you handle Emma's appointment?" I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, the same feeling I'd been pushing down for months. "Ryan, you promised Emma you'd take her. She's been looking forward to showing you her perfect attendance certificate." I know, but this meeting could make or break the biggest deal of my career. These people flew in from out of state just to meet with me. I can't reschedule this. After rearranging my entire afternoon and disappointing Emma, I decided to surprise Ryan by stopping by his office with his favorite coffee from the cafe down the street. Maybe if I showed up with a peace offering, we could talk about what was really going on between us. I parked across from his office building around 3:30 in the afternoon and watched the entrance. At exactly 4:15, I saw Ryan emerge from the glass doors, but he wasn't alone. 3 women walked beside him, all impeccably dressed in expensive-looking suits and jewelry that caught the afternoon sun. They appeared to be in their 50s or early 60s, the kind of women who clearly had money and weren't afraid to show it. Something about their body language seemed too familiar, too comfortable for a business relationship. Ryan was laughing at something one of them said, and when another woman touched his arm, he didn't pull away like he usually did with clients. Instead, he seemed to lean into her touch. I followed them at a distance as they walked 3 blocks to the downtown Marriott. I parked in the garage and watched through the lobby windows as they settled into the upscale bar area. This definitely didn't look like any business meeting I'd ever seen Ryan attend. I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes trying to make sense of what I was witnessing. Every instinct told me to march into that hotel and demand answers, but something held me back. Maybe it was the fear of what I might discover, or maybe it was the growing realization that I already knew this wasn't innocent. Instead of confronting the situation directly, I decided to gather information. I walked into the hotel lobby, trying to look casual, while my heart pounded so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. The bar area was elevated and partially visible from the main lobby, so I positioned myself near the concierge desk, where I could observe without being seen. What I witnessed over the next hour shattered every assumption I'd held about my marriage. Ryan wasn't conducting business. He was flirting, touching hands, leaning in close to whisper things that made all three women laugh. The dynamic was intimate in a way that made my stomach turn. These weren't clients or investors. These were women who knew my husband in ways that had nothing to do with real estate. When I couldn't watch anymore, I approached the front desk. The young woman behind the counter had kind eyes, and I found myself being more honest than I'd planned. "Excuse me, I'm looking for my husband. He said he'd be meeting clients here, but I can't seem to find him in the restaurant." She glanced at her computer screen. "What's his name? I can check if he's registered for any conference rooms." "Ryan Parker." Her fingers moved across the keyboard, and then her expression changed slightly. "Oh, Mr. Parker, yes, he's one of our regular guests. He has a reservation today under his usual booking." Regular guests, usual booking. The words hit me like physical blows. "How often does he usually book here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The receptionist seemed to realize she might have said too much. "I'm not really supposed to discuss guest information, but he's been coming in about twice a week for the past 6 months or so." 6 months. While I was home with our children planning family dinners and helping with homework, Ryan had been maintaining a double life that involved regular hotel visits with women I'd never heard of. I thanked the receptionist and walked back to my car on shaking legs. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and stop signs that I barely registered. When I pulled into our driveway, I sat for several minutes staring at our house with its perfectly manicured lawn and cheerful flower boxes. From the outside, we looked like the American dream. But I was beginning to understand that the life I thought I was living was nothing more than an elaborate performance. That evening, I went through the motions of normal family life. I made dinner, helped with homework, gave baths, and read bedtime stories. Ryan came home around 9:30, claiming his meeting had run late, and then he'd grab dinner with the team to celebrate closing the deal. He kissed my forehead and asked about Emma's doctor appointment, playing the role of concerned father and devoted husband. But I was no longer buying the performance. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. I noticed that our joint savings account had several large withdrawals over the past few months, each one marked as business expenses. I found credit card statements hidden in Ryan's home office showing charges at expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, and high-end department stores. The amounts were staggering, and none of these purchases had benefited our family. One statement showed a charge for over $3,000 at Tiffany & Company. On the same day, Ryan had told me we couldn't afford to replace our broken washing machine. Another showed dinner for 4 people at the most expensive steakhouse in Scottsdale, on a night when Ryan claimed he was working late, and I ate leftover pizza with the kids. The evidence was mounting, but I still didn't have the complete picture. I knew Ryan was lying about where he went and what he did, but I didn't understand the full scope of what was happening. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I hired a private investigator. Janet Morrison came highly recommended by the divorce attorney I'd secretly consulted online. She was a former police detective in her early 50s, with 20 years of experience uncovering infidelity cases. When we met at a coffee shop across town, far from anywhere Ryan might see us, Janet listened to my story with the kind of professional sympathy that told me she'd heard variations of this tale many times before. "Mrs. Parker, I want you to understand that once we start this investigation, we're likely to uncover information that will be painful to hear. Are you prepared for that possibility?" I thought about Emma and Jake, about the life I'd built that might all be a lie, about the growing certainty that I already knew my marriage was over. I need to know the truth. What Janet discovered over the next 3 weeks was more devastating than anything I could have imagined. Ryan wasn't just having an affair. He was involved in what she called a sugar baby arrangement with not one but 3 wealthy older women. The women I'd seen at the hotel were Margaret Walsh, a retired pharmaceutical company CEO, Patricia Hendricks, a family court judge, and Catherine Liu, a prominent surgeon. According to Janet's research, Ryan had met Margaret through a business connection almost 2 years earlier. What started as networking had evolved into a transactional relationship, where Ryan provided companionship and sexual services in exchange for expensive gifts and direct payments. Margaret had then introduced Ryan to her friends, and he'd developed similar arrangements with Patricia and Catherine. The evidence Janet provided was overwhelming and humiliating. Photographs showed Ryan wearing a $15,000 Rolex that Margaret had given him for his birthday, a birthday he told me he wanted to keep low-key because work was too stressful for celebrations. Bank records revealed that Ryan had received over $40,000 in direct deposits from accounts linked to all 3 women over the past 18 months. Janet had also discovered that Ryan maintained a luxury apartment across town that none of our family or friends knew about. The rent was paid directly by Patricia Hendricks, and according to the doorman, Janet interviewed Ryan, brought different women there regularly, sometimes separately and sometimes together. "There's more, Mrs. Parker," Janet said during our final meeting. "Your husband has been planning for this to end for some time. He's consulted with a divorce attorney and has been moving assets to accounts you don't have access to. He's also made statements to these women about his plans to leave his family." The betrayal went deeper than infidelity. Ryan had been systematically planning to abandon Emma, Jake, and me, while living off the generosity of women who probably had no idea he was married with young children. He'd been stealing from our children's future while building an exit strategy that would leave us with nothing. That night I couldn't sleep. I stood in our bedroom doorway watching Ryan sleep peacefully while my entire world crumbled around me. This man who I'd loved and trusted for over a decade, who I'd built a family with, who I'd sacrificed my career for, had been living a double life that made a mockery of everything we'd built together. But alongside the devastation, something else was growing inside me. It was anger, yes, but it was more than that. It was a fierce determination to protect my children and to refuse to be a victim of Ryan's selfishness and deception. The financial implications were staggering. Janet's investigation revealed that Ryan had siphoned nearly $50,000 from our joint accounts over the past year, money that was supposed to be saved for Emma and Jake's college educations. He'd also taken out a second mortgage on our house without my knowledge, using forged documents that included my signature. Our family was essentially broke while Ryan lived like a wealthy bachelor on someone else's dime. The expensive clothes he wore, the new BMW he claimed was a lease through his company, even the fancy dinners he occasionally brought home were all paid for by his wealthy benefactors. I began experiencing panic attacks, waking up in the middle of the night with my heart racing and my mind spinning through worst-case scenarios. How would I support my children? Where would we live? How could I explain to Emma and Jake that their father had chosen money and other women over his family? But even in my darkest moments, I knew I couldn't continue living this lie. My children deserved better than a father who saw them as obstacles to his financial advancement. They deserved a mother who was strong enough to build a real life for them, even if it meant starting over from nothing. I spent a week planning exactly how I would confront Ryan with the evidence. I knew I'd only get one chance to have this conversation before he went into full damage control mode, so I needed to be strategic about timing and approach. I arranged for Emma and Jake to spend the weekend at my sister Michelle's house, telling them it was a special cousin's sleepover. Michelle had been my closest confidant growing up, but we drifted apart during my marriage because Ryan always found reasons why we couldn't visit or why she couldn't come to our house. Now I realized his behavior had been deliberately isolating me from my support system. Saturday evening, after the kids were safely settled at Michelle's, I laid out all of Janet's evidence on our dining room table. Bank statements, photographs, written reports, phone records, everything organized in neat piles that told the complete story of Ryan's betrayal. When Ryan came home from what he claimed was a golf game with clients, he found me sitting calmly at the head of our dining table, surrounded by the documentation of his double life. "Clara, what's all this?" His voice was cautious, but not yet panicked. He probably thought these were household bills or tax documents. "This is the truth about where you've been spending your time and our money for the past 2 years," I said quietly. "I hired a private investigator, Ryan. I know about Margaret, Patricia, and Catherine. I know about the apartment, the gifts, the money. I know everything." The color drained from his face as he picked up the first photograph, the one showing him kissing Margaret outside the expensive restaurant. His hands were shaking as he rifled through the bank statements and saw his own signature on withdrawal slips for money that had gone directly into his personal account. For several minutes, he tried to deny everything. These were fake documents, he claimed. Someone was trying to frame him. The private investigator was lying. But the evidence was too comprehensive, too detailed, too overwhelming for his denials to hold any weight. Finally, he broke down and confessed. It started innocently, he said, slumping into the chair across from me. Margaret and I met at a real estate conference. She was charming and sophisticated, and she invited me to dinner to discuss some investment properties. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, we were involved. Involved, I repeated flatly. You mean you were sleeping with her for money? It wasn't like that at first. She genuinely helped my business introduce me to potential clients. The gifts were just expressions of gratitude. And the other women, Margaret introduced me to them. They were all lonely, divorced, or widowed. They wanted companionship, someone to escort them to social events, someone to make them feel desirable again. It seemed harmless. Harmless. I could barely keep my voice level. You've stolen $50,000 from our children's future. You've taken out a second mortgage on our house. You've been lying to me every single day for 2 years. How exactly is that harmless? Ryan's confession continued for over an hour, and each new detail made the betrayal worse. He admitted that the relationship had become primarily sexual within a few months of meeting Margaret. He acknowledged that he'd been planning to leave our marriage for almost a year, consulting with attorneys about how to minimize alimony and child support payments. The most devastating revelation came near the end of our conversation. I never wanted kids, Clara. You know that. We only had them because you insisted, and then you expected me to be this devoted family man when all I wanted was to build my career and enjoy my life. Emma and Jake are your children, Ryan. How can you talk about them like they're some kind of burden? Because that's what they are. His honesty was brutal and final. I love them, but I never wanted the responsibility. Margaret understands that. She's offered to help me start over to build the kind of life I actually want. In that moment, I realized that the man I'd married had never really existed. The loving father, the devoted husband, the partner who'd promised to build a life with me, had all been performances. The real Ryan was someone who could abandon his children for money and luxury, someone who could lie to my face every day while planning to leave us financially ruined. But his honesty also gave me clarity. This wasn't a marriage worth saving. This wasn't a man worth fighting for. This was someone who had already abandoned his family emotionally and financially long before I discovered his secret life. When Ryan realized that I wasn't going to forgive him or agree to work things out, his demeanor changed completely. The apologetic confessional husband disappeared, and someone much uglier took his place. If you think you're going to take me for everything I've worked for, you're wrong, he said coldly. I have good lawyers, and I have resources you can't compete with. Margaret, Patricia, and Catherine all think very highly of me. They'll support me through a divorce, help me fight any ridiculous claims you might make. You're threatening me. I'm telling you the reality of the situation. You haven't worked a real job in 7 years. You have no income, no savings of your own, no support system. If you fight me on this, you'll lose everything and end up raising those kids in poverty. But if you're reasonable about this divorce, I'll make sure you and the children are taken care of. His threats revealed the depth of his planning and manipulation. This wasn't a spontaneous affair that had gotten out of hand. This was a calculated strategy to transition from one life to another with minimal financial or legal consequences. That night, after Ryan left to stay at his secret apartment, I sat in our empty house and cried for the life I'd thought I was living and the future I'd thought we were building. But underneath the grief was something stronger. It was rage, determination, and the absolute certainty that I would not let Ryan destroy my children's lives to fund his selfish fantasies. The next morning, I called my sister Michelle and told her everything. She listened without judgment, offered her spare bedroom for as long as we needed it, and helped me develop a plan to protect myself and the children legally and financially. Michelle had gone through her own difficult divorce 3 years earlier, so she understood the importance of acting quickly and strategically. She connected me with her divorce attorney, Jennifer Blackwood, who specialized in cases involving hidden assets and complex financial fraud. Jennifer's office was in a high-rise building downtown, and when we met on Monday morning, she reviewed all of Janet's evidence with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen similar cases many times before. Mrs. Parker, your husband has committed several forms of fraud that will work strongly in your favor during divorce proceedings. The forged documents, the hidden accounts, the depletion of marital assets. These are all serious legal violations that will influence how a judge divides your property and determines support. What about his threats? He says he has resources and lawyers that I can't compete with. Men like your husband often overestimate their power in these situations. The law protects spouses and children from exactly the kind of financial abuse you've experienced. We'll file for emergency temporary support and seek an immediate injunction preventing him from moving any more marital assets. Over the next week, Jennifer helped me understand my rights and options. Despite Ryan's attempts to hide money and plan his exit strategy, the law was on my side because we lived in a community property state where marital assets belonged equally to both spouses, regardless of who earned them. While Jennifer handled the legal strategy, I focused on practical preparations. I opened a new bank account that Ryan couldn't access and transferred the small amount of money I had in my personal checking account. I researched job opportunities in graphic design and discovered that my skills were still marketable, especially with the growth of digital marketing companies. Most importantly, I began preparing Emma and Jake for the changes that were coming. I couldn't shield them from the reality that our family was breaking apart, but I could help them understand that they were loved and that the divorce was about problems between their parents, not anything they had done wrong. The children's reactions broke my heart. Emma at 7 was old enough to sense that something serious was happening, but too young to fully understand why Daddy wouldn't be living with us anymore. Jake at 5 kept asking when Daddy was coming home and whether he'd still help him learn to ride his bike without training wheels. I joined an online support group for single mothers and began attending weekly therapy sessions to help me process the trauma of discovering Ryan's betrayal and prepare emotionally for the challenges ahead. Dr. Sarah Wilson, my therapist, helped me understand that Ryan's behavior wasn't a reflection of any failure on my part, but rather the actions of someone who had never been fully committed to our marriage or family. During this time, Ryan's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would show up at the house unannounced, sometimes bringing expensive gifts for the children, while refusing to contribute to their basic expenses like school lunches or medical copays. He seemed to think he could maintain his role as the fun, generous father while abandoning all responsibility for daily care and financial support. One evening, he arrived with a new iPad for Emma and a remote control truck for Jake, expensive toys that probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget. When the children were playing with their gifts, he pulled me aside. "See how happy they are. I can give them things you never could on your own. Don't you want what's best for them?" What's best for them is a father who prioritizes their security and stability over his own selfish desires, I replied. Expensive toys can't replace reliable support and consistent presence in their lives. Ryan's attempts to manipulate me through the children only strengthened my resolve to protect them from his toxic influence. I documented every interaction, every missed commitment, every example of his putting his own interests ahead of their well-being. Meanwhile, Jennifer was building a strong case for our divorce settlement. Ryan's wealthy benefactors were proving less supportive than he'd expected once they realized he was married with young children. Apparently, being someone's sugar baby was one thing, but being complicit in child abandonment was quite another. Margaret Walsh in particular seemed uncomfortable with the situation once she understood the full implications of Ryan's family circumstances. According to Jennifer's sources, Margaret had significantly reduced her financial support and was reconsidering her offer to help Ryan through the divorce proceedings. 3 weeks after our confrontation, Ryan made a decision that revealed just how far he'd fallen from the man I thought I'd married. He showed up at our neighborhood barbecue with Margaret Walsh introducing her to our neighbors and friends as his business partner and investor. I watched from across the yard as Ryan laughed and socialized, while Margaret hung on his arm, playing the role of successful businesswoman interested in local real estate opportunities. Our neighbors, who had known Ryan and me as a couple for over 5 years, were clearly confused by the dynamic but too polite to ask direct questions. When Margaret approached me near the dessert table, her confidence was remarkable. "You must be Clara," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ryan has told me so much about you. You have lovely children." "Has he told you that those children are his?" I asked quietly. Her composure faltered slightly. "Of course. He's mentioned that he's going through a difficult divorce." "Did he mention that he's been stealing from those children's college funds to pay for his lifestyle? Or that he's planning to abandon them entirely to move in with you?" Margaret's face went pale, and she excused herself quickly. Within 10 minutes, I saw her having an intense conversation with Ryan near the street. By the time the barbecue ended, they'd both left without saying goodbye to anyone. That evening marked the end of my patience with Ryan's manipulation and disrespect. I called Jennifer and told her I was ready to file divorce papers immediately. I want to move forward with everything: temporary support custody arrangements, asset protection, all of it. I'm done trying to preserve his dignity or protect his reputation. The next morning, while Ryan was at his apartment, a process server delivered divorce papers to his office. Jennifer had also filed for a temporary restraining order based on Ryan's increasingly erratic behavior and emotional manipulation of the children. Ryan's reaction was swift and vindictive. He called me screaming about how I'd humiliated him in front of his business associates and demanding that I withdraw the legal filings. When I refused, he threatened to fight for full custody of the children, claiming that I was an unfit mother who couldn't provide for them financially. "You think you can destroy my life and walk away unscathed?" he yelled over the phone. "I'll make sure you get nothing. Margaret and Patricia have both offered to help me hire the best attorneys in the state. You'll be lucky if you see those kids once a month when this is over." But Ryan's threats were empty bluster. His wealthy supporters were backing away as the reality of his situation became clear, and his own attorney was advising him to settle quickly rather than face a contentious trial that would expose all of his financial fraud and abandonment of parental responsibilities. The next 6 weeks were the most difficult of my life. I moved Emma and Jake into Michelle's spare bedroom while our house was evaluated and prepared for sale as part of the divorce settlement. The children struggled with the disruption to their routine and the gradual realization that their parents' marriage was really ending. Ryan's visits with the children became sporadic and unreliable. He'd promise to pick them up for dinner or a movie, then cancel at the last minute because of work obligations or travel plans. Emma stopped asking when she'd see Daddy again, and Jake began having nightmares about being left alone. During this period, I also had to confront my own financial reality. I hadn't worked full-time in 7 years, and my skills were somewhat outdated. I enrolled in online courses to update my graphic design knowledge and began freelancing for small businesses to rebuild my portfolio and confidence. The work was challenging but rewarding in ways I'd forgotten were possible. I'd given up so much of my professional identity during my marriage that I'd almost forgotten the satisfaction of creating something meaningful and being valued for my skills, rather than just my role as wife and mother. 6 months after that terrible afternoon in the hotel parking lot, I sat in Jennifer's office signing the final divorce papers. Ryan had agreed to a settlement that gave me primary custody of Emma and Jake, along with fair division of our remaining marital assets and ongoing child support payments. Ryan's relationship with Margaret had ended badly just 2 months into the divorce proceedings, when she discovered the full extent of his deceptions and financial irresponsibility. Patricia and Catherine had also distanced themselves once the legal proceedings made their relationships with Ryan a matter of public record. The man who had thought he could abandon his family for a luxurious lifestyle funded by wealthy women found himself alone and struggling financially. His reputation in the real estate community had suffered, and many of his former clients had moved their business elsewhere. Meanwhile, Emma, Jake, and I had settled into a comfortable 2-bedroom apartment in a family-friendly neighborhood with good schools. I'd landed a full-time position with a growing marketing firm that offered flexible schedules and encouraged work-life balance. The children were thriving in ways that surprised me. Without the constant tension and uncertainty that had filled our house during Ryan's double-life period, both kids seemed more relaxed and secure. Emma's grades improved dramatically, and Jake's nightmares stopped once he realized that our new routine was stable and predictable. Ryan saw the children every other weekend, though he often found excuses to shorten or cancel his visits. The expensive gifts had stopped once his income decreased, but Emma and Jake didn't seem to miss them. What they valued was consistency, honesty, and the knowledge that they could count on me to be present both physically and emotionally. My relationship with my extended family had also strengthened dramatically. Michelle and I were closer than we'd been since childhood, and I'd reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. I realized how much Ryan had isolated me from people who truly cared about my well-being. The therapy sessions with Dr. Wilson had helped me understand patterns in my relationship with Ryan that I'd never recognized before. I'd accepted his gradual withdrawal and emotional absence as normal relationship changes, rather than recognizing them as signs of someone who was no longer invested in our marriage. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my instincts again. The gut feelings I'd ignored or rationalized away had been accurate warnings about Ryan's deception and the deterioration of our relationship. I promised myself that I would never again ignore those internal warning signals in favor of maintaining false peace. My children were learning valuable lessons too, though I wish they didn't have to learn them so young. They were seeing that people's actions matter more than their words, that real love involves sacrifice and commitment, and that sometimes walking away from a bad situation is the strongest choice you can make. Emma had started asking thoughtful questions about relationships and trust that showed she was processing our family's experience in healthy ways. Jake had begun talking about wanting to be the kind of daddy who comes home every night and helps with homework, showing that he understood the difference between a present father and an absent one. Looking back now, 18 months later, I can see that moment outside the hotel wasn't when my marriage ended. My marriage had been dying slowly for years, killed by Ryan's selfishness, dishonesty, and gradual abandonment of his responsibilities to our family. That Tuesday afternoon was when I finally stopped participating in the lie that our relationship was salvageable. It was when I chose to face the truth rather than continue living in denial about who Ryan really was and what he actually wanted from life. The woman who sat frozen in that parking lot was someone who had lost herself so completely in trying to maintain an illusion of happiness that she'd forgotten her own worth and strength. The woman I am today knows that she deserves honesty, respect, and partnership from anyone who claims to love her. Emma and Jake are now 9 and 7, thriving in school and activities, surrounded by people who prioritize their well-being above all else. They have a father who sees them when it's convenient for him, but they also have a mother who would move mountains to protect and support them. I've started dating again very carefully and selectively. The experience of being deceived so thoroughly by someone I trusted completely has made me more cautious, but also more clear about what I will and won't accept in a relationship. I know what red flags look like now, and I trust myself to pay attention to them. My career has flourished in ways I never expected. The marketing firm where I work has promoted me twice, and I'm earning more money than Ryan and I ever made together. Financial independence has given me confidence and security that I didn't realize I was missing during my marriage. Ryan occasionally tries to reinsert himself into our lives when his current circumstances become difficult, but those attempts are becoming less frequent as he accepts that the life he chose has consequences he can't escape. His relationship with Emma and Jake remains sporadic and superficial, more about his need to feel like a good father than about actually being one. The 3 older women who briefly funded his fantasy life have all moved on to other relationships or chosen to embrace single life rather than risk being deceived again. Margaret Walsh, ironically, has become an advocate for financial literacy among divorced women, using her experience with Ryan as a cautionary tale about the importance of investigating someone's character before becoming financially involved with them. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry about the years I lost the money that was stolen, the deception that cost our family so much. The answer is complicated. I'm angry about what Ryan's choices cost Emma and Jake, about the instability and confusion they experienced because of his selfishness. But I'm not angry about the journey that led me to where I am today. The woman who discovered those hotel meetings was passive dependent, willing to ignore obvious problems to maintain false security. The woman I am now is strong, independent, clear about her values, and absolutely committed to building an authentic life based on truth rather than comfortable lies. My children are learning to value honesty, integrity, and genuine commitment because they've seen the difference between real love and selfish performance. They're growing up with a mother who models independence and strength rather than someone who sacrifices her own worth to maintain someone else's comfort. When Emma asks me about relationships and marriage, I tell her that real love involves 2 people choosing each other every single day, supporting each other's growth, and prioritizing their shared life above individual desires for excitement or novelty. When Jake talks about the kind of husband and father he wants to become, I see him incorporating lessons about consistency, honesty, and putting family first. The hardest truth I had to learn was that some people will sacrifice anything and anyone to get what they want, and that love alone isn't enough to change someone who doesn't want to change. But the most beautiful truth I discovered was that walking away from a life built on lies creates space for something real and lasting to grow. Sometimes the hardest truths lead to the most beautiful beginnings. That moment outside the Marriott, when I chose to seek the truth rather than live in denial, was when my real life finally began. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between comfortable lies and difficult truths in your own relationships? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or helped you in any way, Please hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about overcoming life's biggest challenges. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they have the strength to choose truth over comfort, no matter how difficult that choice might seem. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that sometimes the ending you fear most is actually the beginning you've been waiting for your whole life.